All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the final Coffee with Candidates event for 2023. I'm Jack Genoway. I'm the Business Advocacy Manager for the Billings Chamber. Thank you all very much for coming and wanting to learn more about what's going on in your local elections. I first and foremost want to thank our sponsors, who we would not be able to host free events like this without their support. First Interstate Bank, KLJ, Western Security Bank, Phillips 66, Rocky Mountain College, Riverstone Health, Par Montana, which is formerly ExxonMobil, and Julie Seedhouse with Century 21 Home Brokers. And I also, of course, want to thank the Billings Association of Realtors for partnering us with on this series, and turn it over to Steve Simonson to talk about what they do.
Thanks, Jack. Well, good morning. Welcome to the Billings Association of Realtors. A little bit about our association. We have 1,400 members here in Yellowstone County, and by the way, we do vote. We have a territory that stretches from Red Lodge up through Lewistown to Havre and all points east. So 29 counties, 47 of the 150 elected legislators to the state of Montana reside in the territory of the Billings Association of Realtors. So for those of you that haven't been to the building before, restrooms are just around the corner here, and welcome. Let's get started. Thank you.
We are recording this event for the benefit of anybody who's not able to be here. That's what the microphones are for. And so but we'll just try to project for everybody that's in the room. I have a number of scripted questions on topics that are important to the Billings Chamber and the Billings Association of Realtors. But then the latter half of the event, we will turn it over to questions from you as the audience. So be thinking about the things that you most want to know from your candidates. We'll start with a different candidate each time. We'll each have 2 minutes to answer each question. And we'll start with Councilman Neese. And first and foremost, we would just want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the audience and talk about what your priorities are for the coming years, why you wanted to be on City Council in the first place. So please introduce yourself and talk about why you want to be, in your case, reelected to City Council.
Okay, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, good. So first of all, I'm a resident of Billings 30 years. My wife and I moved here. I've been married 35 years. We've got 2 kids that have really raised here, 3 grandkids. Really, really loved Montana. In fact, when my company I worked for decided to move out of state, I decided to stay. So it's been a great time being in Billings. This is a great community. We often hear that we got to improve, or Bozeman or Missoula, but Billings is a great place to live. And so I think that people need to realize that. We got a lot of good things going for us. And so, as I grew up in this community, I got involved in the Heights Task Force. Task Force are great things to be. Citizens need to really get a part of that, because you really are, you're coming together as neighbors and friends in your community, and then you're advocating things to City Council. And that's really where I got my first experience and exposure to the city government, was being involved in that. And been involved in that probably 14 years now. 2 of those years, I was actually the chair. We worked on issues such as the Inner Belt Loop, Castle Rock Park, things like that we would bring back to City Council, to council members. And I really got my exposure to the city government, working with council members there, testifying before council, and understanding that. And then really as involved in that, really got to understand a lot of the workings of city government. When Larry Brewster retired in 2018, we applied. There were several of us running to be appointed by the mayor to replace him, and so I was selected and ran and filled out his last year of his term, and then ran for re-election. And so it was a easy transition for me to go from, Heights Task Force, working with them, being appointed for a year, understanding, and I've got 0 minutes? 30 minutes. Okay, thank you. So it was nice to be able to transition that way. And then now being on council, I've been able to establish lots of good relationship with staff and different council members. And we really work together to bring different changes to the government. So really the whole reason I got involved was because I want to see the residents who are really busy working out there, doing their everyday lives, to be able to work, play, and really be safe in the city. And that's the kind of thing I look at. I'm a conservative voice on the council, and I am running against so I can maintain that.
All right. Mr. Hanson, please introduce yourself to the audience and talk about why you would like to be on City Council.
Good morning, everybody. Is my voice okay? Make sure everybody can hear me. My name is Dustin Hanson. I've lived in Billings for over 30 years, born and raised in Montana, senior high grad, shout out Bronx. And the only time I never lived in Montana was for 2 years at a trade school in Florida. I came back to Billings to start my life and my family. My kids have been born here, raised here. There's not a better underrated town, I think, in Montana. And I think we need to find ways to make us, more well known in Montana versus places like Bozeman and Missoula. I think we offer a lot more than what they can do. And my background's in software engineering. I did that for over 20 years, so I like to call myself a professional problem solver. I've worked in a number of different industries, whether it's telecom, medical, gaming, all different kinds. I currently have 2 small businesses that I run every day. So I'm a very, very busy person, especially being a single father as well. And I feel my generation needs to be included a little bit. I feel like so much more in politics, not just at the local level, but even at the state level. There's not enough people of my generation and younger voices being properly heard. And so that's the biggest reason why I decided to run.
Okay. For everybody's reference, City Council adopts a list of their stated priorities every year, and public safety is still the City Council's #1 stated policy priority. So what do you believe should be done about public safety in Billings, Mr. Hanson?
Well, unfortunately, it's not a one-size-fits-all type of solution. It has to be a huge community involvement across not only just neighborhoods in general and people in general, but obviously the police department. And one of the big things that I would like to see us happening is I like to coin a phrase that Billings needs to grow up. And I literally mean that physically. We need to stop spreading so far out because it causes our police and firefighters to have to cover more areas. And so then there's less coverages at the places that matter. And so I think that's something else that we should really look at. Spreading those resources too thin, like I said. But, there's not one size fits all answer to that.
Councilman Neeks?
Thank you. Yeah, the priorities that Billings has, that is really on the minds and of everyone. Even at the Heights area, typically when you look at the overall crime rate, Heights has got a lesser crime rate, but people want to feel safe throughout the city when they go, wherever they go in the city. And so, in City Council, we've done several things over the years, and we're continuing to do. In fact, this last budget cycle, we looked at multiple ways because it isn't one thing that's going to fix it. It's multiple things. So in this case, we're proposing things, for instance, a holding for municipality infractions. And so that these people can appear before a judge and they're not going to be going back out on the street. Because today, if someone gets arrested, if it's nonviolent and there's no room at the jail, they have to be turned out on the street. And so then they have a warrant to appear and they don't appear. So things like this, where the City Council is working to help make sure that the criminals are accountable for what they do. That's just one of the things. We've also, just last night, we approved a contract with the Nurse Partnership Program. This is where they work as a prevention. So not only just affecting what the police do in arresting and that we're looking at diversion, we're looking at prevention. There's lots of different ways that the City Council now has proposed ways for the city to move forward on. And so really, if the city can move forward on the plan that the council has provided to them, I think that we'll see a reduction in crime.
Okay. In addition to the City Council election this fall, there's also going to be a question on the ballot asking voters to approve a $143 million Parks and Recreation and Trails bond. So question's rather simple. Do you support this initiative? Why or why not?
So the initiative that is on the ballot today, I do not support. Earlier, I think there's a question that we answered to the chamber earlier. Do I support the initiative going to the voters? And if you look at the questionnaire I gave to the chamber at that time, yes, I did. I did support an initiative going to the voters. And in fact, during the City Council discussions, we talked about different ways to really present this to the voters. What I believe that is, when you look at this, the bond that's going out there, it's a massive bond. Even though it's 143, as it's stated, it's actually going to cost the voters over $200 million to actually implement. And that's only the upfront costs. There's still lots of questions about what are we going to do about traffic around that area. I brought that up during the council meeting, and there was like, well, we'll address that when it comes around to it. Well, that's going to be more cost and infrastructure that we're going to have to expense to do that. More taxes that the voters are going to have to be assessed so they can do that. What about the operational cost of this? It's the initial projection years ago was $500,000 the net loss, and so we're looking at lots of unanswered questions to build this the rec center. Now on the park side, I was fully supportive of the parks and asked the council to split the vote so we had parks development because I want to see our parks developed. I mean, people like to live and play in Billings. This is a great town, and we need our parks developed. But the rec center was unfortunately is 58% of that ask of the voters, and it's really taken much more than what I think than the public can afford at this time, and then not even knowing what the expenses are in the future. So I don't support the current initiative or the current ballot language, but I would support something that came out and actually asked the park for our development of our parks.
Okay. Mr. Hanson.
Yeah, thank you. I 100% support it. I think it's a difficult time for everybody that's a property owner and then people that subsequently rent from property owners with the rising property taxes that the state sent out. It's really scared of everybody. Unfortunately, I think this is kind of a once in a generation type of a project that can really change Billings. And it's something that I think if it helps everybody at all ends of the city. It's just not a specific area. It's not just helping just South Side, or it's not just helping the Heights or the West End. It's literally everybody all at the same time. It is a big project, but it's literally going to be, if we pass this and move forward, it'll be a landmark change in our city.
All right. We'll come back to you for the next question. For both of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this topic, but for anybody who's not, tax increment finance districts, or TIF districts, are specific areas where part of the tax revenue is set aside in a specific account to be reinvested into that area to remove blight and improve property values within that area. So the question on a very complex topic is rather simple. Do you, in general, support TIF districts, and are there any changes that you would propose to how they're currently used?
I love TIF districts. In fact, I think it's a very smart and modern way to help re-incentive certain areas that need care, little TLC. I was shocked to learn that the Heights doesn't really have one. And I'm not sure why. I feel like all the other parts of the city do, and the Heights gets left behind. And that's another big reason why I wanted to run, because I would love to see the Heights get a TIF district. I know we have some difficult geographic problems because we primarily have just Main Street for a lot of commercial work. But there's still a lot of those areas that could be redeveloped if we had a TIF district, and it could encourage new growth up at the Heights that I think we desperately need.
Councilman Neese?
Thank you. Yeah, TIF districts are one of the few tools that the city can utilize to help really eliminate blight within the different neighborhoods. And so, initially, TIF districts, can be misused. Unfortunately, they're highly controlled by the state. And so what the state is actually looking at some of those TIF laws, a lot of that legislation that was proposed this year really would have inhibited the TIF districts from doing a lot of things that they're doing today. So when it comes to the TIF districts, I think it's a great tool the city can use if it uses it properly to really remove that blight. One of the things that I've talked to as we've looked at TIF districts is really help them try to hone in on really what they're doing as far as, for the overall project. Because the goal is to increase the tax base. And so in order to do that, you just can't throw money around and remove blight. You have to look at what it's going to spur the economic development and things like that. So I do support the use of TIF districts, but I cautiously make sure that they're looking for instance, the downtown. Right now, we need more housing down there because we need people in there. So that's some of the things that council can do is talk to these TIF districts and ask them to look for different ways to improve their district to have that value grow. Downtown definitely needs housing because you need those people on the street. And so we're looking at that, and we're seeing projects down there. The Heights, actually, the Heights Business Association have talked about creating a TIF district up there. I'm in support of that. That's a really good idea. It'll take the businesses together and really come to the council and bring that whole TIF district idea. And there's been talk mentioning that, and there's support both from Besida who is willing to help them formulate that TIF district. And so if the Heights businesses want to bring something like that, that would be a great idea to help develop some of those areas of Heights as well.
All right. In 2024, voters are going to be asked whether they would like to appoint a study commission to review the city charter and the Yellowstone County form of local government as well. Are there any changes to the city charter that you would support? Why or why not?
So I do support the idea of having a commission to look at the city charter. The changes are going to really come from that commission and from the voters to approve that at a later time if the commission is approved. But the city charter has served this community well for a number of years. Now, could it change? The city is growing. We have got lots. We're much larger than we were when I first moved here, and so it is time to look at that and look at different ways and how the city can maybe run a little bit differently. Should the council members be full time? That's a really good question. I mean, I work full time and I volunteer basically as the city council. And in between my time, I'm reading packets that are 2 inches thick and doing a lot of different research, answering constituents' questions and talking with city staff. So there's a lot of different things that maybe if there are ideas that this commission come together, yes, I would support some of those to really how it's going to really make the city more accountable to the people. And that's the one thing about this charter is it really does hold city government and city council members to the public. And so as long as changes that are made to the charter that really continue to hold people to accountable to the public, I'd be in favor of that if we can make me run the government a little more efficiently with a different change in the charter.
Mr. Hanson.
Yeah, I think this is an exciting time to be either running for city council or be a part of it. With the city charter potentially being able to be rewritten through a commission, it really allows Billings to kind of modernize itself. I mean, a lot of people would consider the city charter the kind of the constitution of the city. And if you could think, going back hundreds of years, you could rewrite the constitution of our country. We have that opportunity now with Billings. And I think it's something that we should look at a lot of different models, and that commission should definitely propose what we feel is the best and then have the voters choose based on that. But I think it's an incredible time to modernize it and make sure everybody can be held accountable. I would even be up for, the idea of maybe Billings is large enough now that city council members need to be, more than one day a week. That's something that would look at. So I think it's a great time, and it definitely would approve of looking at a new city charter.
All right. We are making excellent time. I have one more question I would like to ask the candidates, and then we'll turn it over to questions from you in the audience. So be thinking about what you most want to ask these candidates. And again, for reference, a couple of years ago, the City Council adopted one of the first major changes to the city's land use policy and zoning code in, 50 years or something like that, called Project Recode. That really changed the city's zoning code for the first time in a very long time. So, the question to you, Mr. Hanson, how do you feel that Project Recode is working so far, and are there any further changes that you would want to see made to the zoning code?
I'll be the first to admit I'm not a huge, I don't have a huge knowledge base of the Recode. I don't do a lot with property development and realtors and things like that, but I do have friends in construction and friends in realtors. And what I've heard back from them is it's been a huge success. It's simplified a lot of things. I think there's probably more places we can continue to push that to make it even simpler. But it was definitely something that was needed. And I feel the same way kind of about the city charter as well.
Councilman Neese?
Yeah, Recode was, it has turned out better than I anticipated in a lot of different ways. In fact, it was last night we just had one of their, I think they called it their final update, because when you do a massive undertaking like this, there's a lot of changes. And one of the nice things about the Recode is it has simplified things. I think the developers, the builders overall like it, but just to be clear, there was a lot of pushback on it initially, and a lot of concern, a lot of fear over change. Change is never easy to do. But it was really a lot of the council members at the end of that Recode, because it was studied for 3 years before the change was ever done, really did a lot to help bring developers and builders to the table to really make some final changes to it to really make it be more successful. And I think that's the important thing is the council members need to be really involved in these changes so that when these massive changes like that happen, or even minor changes, that that they can help better that change and better that code. And I think because of the council was so involved in that change towards the end, that really helped that code to be more successful. And then continuing on as council, we continued to listen to the Builders Association contractors and encourage the staff to really hold meetings with them. And it really, I think because of that, and because of that communication there, we've seen some positive changes as that code has matured. And so over time now, I think the code has matured to a really good point. And there'll be more changes. And as time goes on, as new different facilities, different type of development happens, I think we'll see more changes to that. But I think overall it's been and I think it's a good model for other cities and communities. Unfortunately, the state legislature did a lot of changes on land use this last session. Some of those were contrary to what we had done through Recode. And so we've now having to change Recode. So what I would hope the state do is have the state look at Billings and seeing what we've done here and how we've done the development and planning of Recode. And I think that would be a good model for them to use to push forward.
All right. What questions do we have from the audience? And we have a little wireless microphone that we'll pass around to capture questions from the recording. So I see a question down here in front.
Good morning. House Bill 675 authorizes the consolidation of county water districts and municipalities when the water that serves the district is purchased from the municipalities. Would you support a consolidation of the Heights County Water District with the city of Billings?
This is why we love having questions from the audience. That's a great Heights-specific question. Councilman Neese.
Thank you. That's a really interesting law. I've been involved, of course, in the Heights for a long time. I understand that issue well. The nice thing about that law is that it really requires the water district to really be the one to initiate that. And so, if the district were to decide that that's the best thing for their water customers and the district, and it would be presented to the council, I would support looking at what that would take and what that merge would be like. And so it really is up to the district to move forward on that if they choose to want to merge into with the city. But yeah, I'd be open to that if the district chose to ask the city to be a part of that.
Mr. Hanson.
Yeah, I actually had the pleasure of actually meeting with the president of the Heights Water District and had a lot of great conversations. And I feel like it's a difficult problem because not only does the Heights Water District serve actually parts of the city of Billings, but it also does a lot of the county stuff. And there's a lot of back and forth about like, well, if we serve them, then they want to maybe annex into the city or force that kind of stuff. And it makes a lot of red tape that makes Heights development not as attractive. And so I think there's got to be some common ground. I think we need to have open communication with the Heights Water District, and whether that's a part of, working together to make the best of both worlds, or if it's to eventually absolve that. I mean, that also is a possibility, but we do have to always remember that it's not just the city residents that water district supports. It's also the county, and a lot of people in the county don't necessarily want to join the city. So it's not an easy solution at all.
Did I see a question back there from Steve? Yeah.
Thank you, Jack. My question for the candidates this morning is, what role do you see the city playing in workforce and affordable housing and infill within the city limits?
Mr. Hanson.
Yeah, I think it's a huge part of it. It's a problem that not only Billings is having, but the entire state of Montana and frankly, really the rest of the country. Affordable housing is on everybody's mind. I have kids that are becoming young adults here pretty soon. And at this stage in life, I don't know that they're ever going to be able to buy a house unless they, become doctors and brain surgeons or win the lottery. It's a sad state at this time, but I don't have that answer, and it's very difficult. But I think it should be up to us to help try to search for those to make affordable housing, whether that's, city run properties or something like that for short-term rentals of, people young age or low income levels. I'm not sure exactly what that would look like, but I mean, that could be an idea. Obviously, I mentioned earlier, I have this little thing that I've come up with that I said Billings needs to grow up. And so I really think that we truly need to become the city of Montana, and, like the Big Sky Tower or whatever, I think project that had talked about a couple, 5 some years ago, that was potentially a great idea. Not necessarily the way that they were going to implement it, but, growing up just helps everybody. It helps walkability for downtown Billings. It helps low income people be able to afford more houses because it's more condensed. The more population you can have in a square footage, the cheaper it ends up being. It helps police and fire because it's a smaller area to cover. So I mean, I would definitely support it, and we definitely have to figure out ways because it's a problem not just here but everywhere. So,
Councilman Neese.
Thank you. Yeah, affordable housing that's one of the questions that we get that phrase thrown around all the time at City Council, and we ask, well, what is affordable to you? And it really depends on the individual in that. So when we look at affordability, it is a tough thing because cost of building is very high, and so what the city government can do in that is help, similar to, like I mentioned, downtown, building housing downtown through the TIF district, and that can help developers' costs, cut some of that, remove blight, bring activity to downtown, and then spur additional development and housing in there. The other thing we need to look at is, again, Recode has done a great job is making some of those changes. So we've seen a lot of good development coming on since Recode. And so it's really fairly recent since we changed that. But again, those are the kind of things that the city government can do to make it a little bit more streamlined, easier to run. We've looked at different processes. What the state has done is going to help as well as far as some of the affordability. I think when we look at sometimes when we look at what the city can do, we sometimes are a little bit outside of our bounds on trying to solve problems. And affordability, we have limited what we can do on that. So what we can do is just encourage developers, look at zoning changes, and help developers build as much as they can and work it that way.
Mr. Neese,
we
interviewed 10 of the 11 elected officials from the city of Billings, and you refused to come to listen to us. And the whole subject was affordability of housing. Our desire is to work with 80 to 125% of median income so people can afford it. That's where wealth begins. That's where we start going forward. And we've had absolutely no help out of the city of Billings. And I'd like to know why, one, you didn't come listen to what we needed was more information, and two, why isn't there more activity working with those that are in the community that are developers and do know something about the housing industry? And for the record, I just bought my 56th license.
Do you have a question for both of the candidates?
That's fine. They both need to answer it.
Okay.
I'm not done. I've only got 56 years in.
All right. We'll start with Councilman Neese there.
Thank you. If you could rephrase the question for me, and who's the requester or who's asking that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, the question, as I understand it, is why is there not more cooperation between the city of Billings and home builders? Is that
why
fair?
didn't Mr. Neese come to the meeting when we asked him to?
All right. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think there is some cooperation between the home builders and the city. I think one of the things that, again, as I mentioned earlier on during the Recode process, we've seen great changes, the city being able to work with both developers, home builders, to really come to a consensus on how we can, update and change our code to make it easier for the developers to actually, put their, get the developments going. And so, it's not just with the city staff working with the developers, they come to council members, and then we work with the staff and kind of bring people together. I think there's a good relationship. In fact, we heard from the home builders last night in city council how they were very thankful for some of the changes that have going on within the Recode, and they say there is a good working relationship between the city and the home builders.
All right, Mr. Hanson.
Thanks for the question, Tom. I'm not as familiar with your group that I'd like to, but I think the easiest way I would answer that is I think just like any relationship in life, there's got to be a lot of listening back and forth. And I feel like that was another big thing I felt like that our city council doesn't necessarily do with all groups and all parties as well as they should. That communication is key. And not only just going out and talking with the community, but like majority of people who work 40, 60 hours a week and don't have time to follow city council and what all that's doing. And so we need to find more modern ways to actually put out the communication of what city council does on a weekly basis, short condensed form video or something like that. Cause that's the hot rage with all the younger people. And if we can start doing that and foster that communication back and forth from not only city council, but from people in the community like yourself, and have those open lines, then I think that's going to be the biggest win for everybody.
All right. Other questions from the audience? John.
I've got a question of clarification for Councilman Neese. You'd mentioned during your comments regarding the bond that you thought it would cost the taxpayers more than $143 million. I just want to clarify that because there are, on the bond, will be 9 parks, 8 trails, the rec center, and each has a specific allocation as to how much money from the bond would be allocated to each of those projects. You'd mentioned it would be more than the $143 million that will be on the bond, when actually it's going to end up costing taxpayers less than the $143 million because there is private money being dedicated to reducing that, as well as they're going to be issued, the bonds will be issued in tiers over time, further reducing the cost to taxpayers. But you had mentioned that it would actually be $200 million as an expense.
Thank you. So that is correct. There's the bond. Just to clarify, also, the bond doesn't have any language in there other than saying that you approve $143 million that the Parks Department can spend the money. So it doesn't. The bond itself does not. The ballot language does not specifically state anything as far as how much or what park it's going to go to or anything like that. So there is a city resolution that talks about how this money is intended to be divvied up and spent, although there is language within that resolution that allows that money to be diverted from one project to another project. And so there's a lot of questions within, how that city resolution, which by the way, which is not law. The contract between the residents and the city is the bond, is the ballot language. And so once that's approved, then there's $143 million in availability of bonding. But once they bond that money, there's interest cost and carrying cost for the length of the 20 years. And so we're looking at, the cost of overall what it's going to cost. When you go out and buy a car or lease a vehicle, they tell you what your monthly payment is and what your entire payments are over the life of that contract. And that's what we're talking about, being over $200 million. When you run the numbers, you're well over $200 million in the life of the contract.
Mr. Hanson, do you have any comments on that?
I do not. I don't know the specifics of the bond. Obviously, I wasn't part of council to as they put that out there. So I do. Again, I just would say I definitely support it. I think it's a once in a generation type of a project, and I would like to see us pass it.
Any other questions from the audience? Oh, I see one back there from a new person.
So I hear there's been a lot of talk about affordable housing. My question to you is, how will you ensure property rights remain intact in Billings, as well as fiscal responsibility and transparency from our government, our city government? Because a lot of the affordable housing, there's a problem because of the taxes, and there is not the fiscal responsibility surrounding those taxes. So I'd like to know from each of you, how would you help with that?
All right. Let's start with Mr. Hanson on this one.
So I guess something I was going to add back to the whole affordable housing with property taxes rising, that's only one side of the question too. You also have just affordability of, what people are making for income. I think Billings is definitely one of the lowest medium incomes in the entire state. And I know we have the lowest teacher salaries in all 50 states. We need to find ways to allow our people to make more money and bring in those type of companies that are going to pay higher wages. And But then as part of getting back to the property rights, I think moving or not moving, but losing any of those would be a very hard thing for anybody to pass and be very unpopular. I don't think any of those rights would ever change. I don't know if there's something specific that you're, referring to or afraid of, but, removing, like taking those rights away from property owners is going to be something that would be very difficult to do. And I definitely probably would not support that.
Councilman Neese?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, because property rights to me are one of the things that I've seen over the years, even before being on a city council, that were impacted. Property rights, I mean, Montana is a great property rights state. We have our property rights, but as we are on council, every single meeting when we have to make decisions on land use, we're impacting someone's property rights. And it's a difficult decision to make at times, because when we see developments going next to properties, and so you're going to be building up, but you've got a nice little single family home there, and you're 20 feet off, you're 4 stories up, and your backyard has now been invaded by this massive building. That's the property right he has. He has the property. He has the right to build that. Yet the property owner who had that single family home, does he not have a property right to enjoy his land as he built it and invested in it? And so we have to look at that balancing act every single issue when we come into land use issues. And that's a very difficult question. And that's where some of the things in changing the RECO that I advocated for is trying to bring some of that setback changes to help protect those property rights of those people. Because as an individual, you invest in your home, and that's probably your entire investment. That's the majority of your investment. Developers invest and move on, and invest and move on. And so they don't necessarily always live with it. Some of them do, but not always live with that. And so it's really, really important as we as council members look at when we're developing the city, how can we balance that property right issue between one person's right to build what they want and another person's right to really enjoy what they've already invested in. And so that's something, again, I believe that in my opinion, and I've advocated this on city council often, is to have good transitions between developments, making sure that single family move to maybe some smaller multifamily into then the larger and type. So that's it's not real popular in a lot of developers' minds because it doesn't always bring the maximum dollar per square foot. And it doesn't always bring the maximum dollar per square foot in taxes. But what it does do is preserve the rights of those people who originally settled there and invested.
Yes.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you, Roy, for Castle Rock Park's playground. I know that was a passionate project for you. And my question to both of you, if you're elected, what will your initiatives or the items that you feel most passionate about that you would bring to council or support during the meetings?
Councilman Neese.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Castle Rock Park has been I've been working on that since Heights Task Force. Inner Belt Loop, that's another area. So that, so that's another passion to make sure the Inner Belt Loop is developed well, because that's can be extending, really the ability for Heights residents to get to the West End, but more importantly, to bring commerce and from the West End up into the Heights. Often we look at Heights as the bedroom community of Billings, but we have the ability to be a big, commerce section as well. So there's a lot of development there that we need to make sure that we're looking ahead for and planning as that. So that's going to be one of my things as the Inner Belt Loop gets developed, to make sure that we're building a good commerce through that. Again, the parks are priority because people like to play. They want to get into their things. We're looking at a development, not just we've got. It's not just by the way, it's not just the park. We also have parking lots, new bathroom coming in, things like that we're bringing to Castle Rock Park. But there's other parks in the community that we also want to work on and develop. So, again, keeping the Heights safe. I talked to the chief last night about what are we doing to make sure Heights stays ahead of the crime wave that's going throughout the whole city. In that, and some of that is bringing more officers, more patrols into the Heights. So we're looking at trying to get additional patrols. Right now, we have a good overlap, and where we get 4 officers at a time during some of the higher peak times. But I'd like to see us have a good 3 to 4 officers up there rotated around. So some of the things like that.
Mr. Hanson.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I decided when I was going to run is that I didn't have an agenda. I don't have huge issues that I'm trying to push. I really want to listen to the people in my ward and what they're looking for and what's the best thing for the Heights and for the rest of Billings all at the same time. But some of the areas that I would focus on if elected would be, I'm really excited about the potential of a new city charter and what that could look like for the future and future proofing of Billings. That obviously goes along with stuff like public safety and affordable housing, all the buzzwords that everybody's talking about these days. But I think doing that and the parks bond, if that's passed, I think would bring an amazing experience to not only the Heights, but other parts of the country or of the city. You'd have areas where, you could almost have like smaller concerts. You could have like small local bands playing for free at a park in the afternoon at, say, Castle Rock, that we can't really do now. It's not as easy. There's not a specific venue. So doing things like that, like with revitalizing the parks and more lighting, I think also just breeds safety as well. And people would be willing to go there at all hours of the day versus I don't think that's the case in almost any park in the city today.
Any other questions? Oh. Go ahead.
So I want to pivot back to the private property rights issue. We have a community just to the south and west of us, Red Lodge, that recently enacted caps or limits on short-term rental units. Thank you both for replying back to the survey that the bar sent out through our Government Affairs Committee. I'm asking that you would tell us your position on short-term rentals and share that with the group today.
All right. Can't remember who's supposed to be going first right now.
I think I'd go for it.
Okay, go for it.
So, it's definitely a double-edged sword because there's a lot of property rights of people that have been blessed with being able to buy a second house, maybe even a remodel, and then being able to rent those out. But at the same time, as we're seeing, there's a lot of larger corporations that are now buying up housing all across the United States, and they're just either trying to flip them or use them for short-term rentals. And there's nobody but maybe a local property management place that has anything to do with that house. And so it's a very difficult situation. That's another big reason why I think a lot of people are worried about affordable housing because there's so much of those second-term rentals. And obviously Red Lodge is a little bit bigger of a touristy area than, say, Billings would be, but we definitely have a lot of people that come here for business and meetings and stuff. So there's still plenty of, Airbnbs around the city. It's going to be a balancing act no matter what. You can't have one without the other. You have those rights, you have that freedom, to have second properties, but at the same time, we can't abuse it. And so we need to figure out how we can prevent abuse of having, many multiple properties, maybe owned by a corporation of, worth $10 billion or something, not allowing those potentially. It's going to be a balancing act.
Councilman Neese?
Thank you. Yeah, property rights, be able to use your property as you see fit, and that. And so in those, a lot of these cases, the Airbnbs that are like, hey, I have just an extra room and come stay for vacation or something like that, those are more what they call ADUs, affordable, additional dwelling units, things like that. So that's not so much the issue. And a lot of it has to do with, as far as the problem in Montana, a lot of the tourism areas are very, very impacted. Billings has a much lesser impact on it, but it does. Every home that is converted to an Airbnb takes one home off the market and puts pressure on rental units. And so, it's a business. And so those are the kind of things that the city needs to look at is if it's going to be a business, let's look at it as a business, not, much a residential. But you have to remember, these type of things are controlled by the state and what we can and can't do on it. And so a lot of this has to be done through advocating through the state legislators. So that's something we discussed, during the legislative session. I was the chair of the legislative committee with City of Billings. And so we would talk about different issues like this so we can bring it to the state legislators and try to enact different legislation. So if it continues to be an issue, we need to advocate through the state. And those are the things where the realtors need to come to us, let us know what's going on as well. And then we can look into and try to see if there's a solution that we can get through the state. But those are the kind of issues that, as city council members, we don't know all. We rely on the public, both in our constituents and the industries, the realtors, the builders, things like that, to bring us things that we can then bring through to city staff and to state legislators or county officials and meet with them to try and find solutions like we're doing with crime and things like that.
So coming back to development again, if you look at property tax, I had a friend once tell me, Zach Tarakitis, I'll give him credit, tell me once that, we don't have a revenue problem. We don't have an expense problem because your expenses are your expenses. We have a revenue problem, and you can change your revenue by, unfortunately, and maybe fortunately in the state of Montana, we are a property tax state. That is all we have available to us. So we have to increase our revenue to cover our expenses. I'm not in favor of just a random increase in taxes, but if you look at property tax revenue as compared to commercial real estate, residential real estate generally puts pennies in the bucket. Commercial real estate puts dollars in the bucket. With two of the biggest infrastructure projects coming into the Heights in the coming years, being Johnson Lane Bypass, Inner Belt Loop, I'm curious if elected, if you would support incentivizing pipes in the ground, something like that, to promote commercial development in those areas as they're coming online.
All right. Councilman Neese.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And first of all, I would disagree a little bit with your premise on revenues or expenses because we've actually, with the CPSM study, which is the public safety study we did years ago, we found that we could actually ask a third less of expenses in funding public safety than having to do what we initially planned years ago. So because of the efficiencies that the study showed that the city could do, we were able to actually keep our expenses down. And so there are ways that we can keep, adjust revenue. But you're right. As the city grows, our expenses are going to grow. And so to that end, we have property taxes. And so a lot of the things we have to look at is what can be covered by property taxes and what can be covered by other different fees and services that people are being charged. And so the causer often needs to be the cost payer in some cases. And so those are the things we need to look at to make sure that it's equitable along things. But you can't do that across the board for everything. One of the things we did recently is really just that, is invest in the ability to put pipes in the ground so that developments can move forward. And then later on, as they come in, pay for those, pay for the connections and the cost for that at another time. So we're doing that. We did over $3 million in investment along the Alkali Creek to get the Inner Belt Loop development started out there. We've actually, the city has got plans to put additional water lines that are going north as well. And then those are the kind of things that the city can do, and it's through different fees that the city's charging to allocate that money for that type of investment. So we have actually, that was something that I had asked to do, to make sure that money gets set aside so they can actually put that money in the ground for that future development.
Mr. Hanson.
Absolutely. I mean, I think those are huge connections to the Heights and specifically to our ward, but also to the part of, adding to the city of Billings. We've been expanding west for so long. This, I think, is going to spur a lot of, northern and eastern development in the city. And so and I think one of the things that the Heights area desperately needs is more commercial development. And I think if we can, whether it's just, pipes in the ground or whatever that looks like, to encourage that kind of development along the Johnson Lane Bridge up in the Heights and the Inner Belt Loop, I think we ought to do it.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
I'd also like to know how each of you will ensure and improve fiscal responsibility and transparency at our city level. Thank you.
Mr. Hanson.
Yeah, this goes back to something that I really wanted to push as far as communication between our city services and the community. I think it would be a great idea to find some college students at MSUB or Rocky that are into, video production and make like short summaries of all the meetings that city council has. so you can make it so that communication happens. So then we understand what happens, in our city council meetings, what was voted on that day. Instead of having to sit through 4 hours of somebody listening, everybody out there in the community doesn't have that amount of time. But the more we can put out short form type of communication of city services to our community, they will have a better idea of what happens on a day-to-day basis and keep that responsibility that saying, hey, well, why did city council just approve this $100 million project for something that I never even heard about? By having that communication line out there, then they can start asking those questions, decide that they see something they don't like or that's going to be happening, and show up to the city council meetings so they could talk and say, and voice their opinion saying, hey, I don't think this is appropriate, or I think you should change it in this manner, just depending on what the project is. So again, key, just communication.
Councilman Neese?
Thank you. Accountability and transparency. That is something that, I ask a lot of questions. And often I've asked not to ask these questions, because of the idea is, we as council members need to, hold the city staff accountable for what they're spending, and it's really, really important that we investigate, we research, we look at the material, and we have to do a lot of our own investigation. We don't have staff, we're there to really advocate for the public, and the staff typically does a great job. They really do. They are professional people who do a really good job. But yet, at times, council needs to really check to see what they're doing. And so those are the kind of things that we need to do as council members, to really get involved in the process to understand the material, ask the questions, hold the staff accountable, and then advocate for the different changes. And the idea also is transparency, is to make sure that these meetings are transparent, are open to the public. Montana has some great open meeting laws, and I know and council members ensure that we're trying to meet all of those open meeting laws to allow people to come participate in the process, because that's what we want to see. We often talk about that. Why we'd love to see people participate more and make it easier for them to participate. We expanded our meetings to, thankfully, unfortunately, there's got some good things that came out of COVID. One of them was the technology to allow Zoom meetings. People can now get on and Zoom, and they are long meetings. And yet they can go on to Community 7. They can click a lot of different highlights and things like that. We invested in a public information officer to allow some of these ideas to come out. So they're getting news stories out and things like that about what's going on in the city. But we need the public to engage. It's really the public. And remember, people are they're hardworking at their home. They're going to work. They're playing. They don't have time for the city meetings to sit for hours and watch a lot of tapes. It takes community together to work together, get involved in different groups like the task force. They get a lot of what's going on within the city, that they announce what's going on. So lots of different organizations, the Kiwanis, different organizations throughout the city will take that information and then relay that out. That's a great idea about having college. So any of the college kids could take that meetings now and do that. So if there's some politically activated college students that wants to do that, they can go to Community 7, talk to them, get the videos, and make and disperse that out. And so it is important that council members, though, really it's up to them to make sure that meetings are held and open, and we follow state statutes to make sure it's open and participatory in a lot of different things. So,
any other questions from the audience?
A couple of years ago, when they were in the process of doing the recode, one of the articles that came out in the Gazette was that there were 18 properties along Grand Avenue that had liquor licenses or gaming operations, and if they were to burn, for instance, they couldn't rebuild at that location. And I sent 2 different letters to the council telling them, I don't think that's really a good idea. You're taking away people's property rights. And I got one acknowledgement back from one of the council members. And in the second letter that I sent, I pointed out that, you're asking for a lawsuit if you're taking somebody's property rights away, because there's value in having the ability to have that kind of a license in a piece of property. And one of the other things I pointed out was the fact that the city is, you're opening yourself up for a lawsuit, and you haven't done really well on lawsuits. You have any comments to make about that?
Councilman Neese?
Yeah, I won't. Well, that just takes the issue. We won't talk about the lawsuit issues because actually our track record has been pretty good. But the what you hear in the news usually is not every lawsuit. So as far as the recode, as far as the changes of existing property, it didn't impact just liquor stores and things like that. It affected a lot of property, and so the city staff worked hard to make sure that there were some grandfathering clauses in there, some rebuilding clauses. There's a lot of different abilities for them. Time for that if property is it just isn't automatic that they can't do it. There has to be a certain length of time that has to happen before. So that really a property would have to be vacated and not used for a longer period of time. And then there's some also administrative relief that can actually help extend some of that time and allow that property to continue. So the recode has done a lot to try to avoid impacting anyone's property rights and their use of that property. But there are times in the community that the city has been given the authority to make certain changes in different uses of property. And I believe recode has found a good balance to allow that. Will it stop anyone from suing? Anyone can hire an attorney and sue, and that's the unfortunate thing or fortunate thing that we have. But when there's a disagreement between parties, it can't come to something. But in that particular case, I believe that the city staff and recode has addressed that appropriately, and I think, as far as I know, there has not been an issue with anything burning down and not being able to rebuild at this time.
Mr. Hanson.
I definitely don't know enough about the recode, especially your specific situation you're talking about regarding, liquor licenses along Grand Avenue. But I would hope that we'd have a way to either not deny you that ability to continue your business because of unfortunate circumstances to your own. Otherwise, I mean, you shouldn't be just taking that right away just because something else changed in the city code. I don't know enough about it. I have to research more to really give you a better answer.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
Well, I was going to pass, but
go for it.
So I want to go back to, and I'm sorry I forgot your name, but on the fiscal responsibility. Dustin, you made the comment, you primarily focused on communication, but it was after the fact. After seeing a council member or council meeting, you're going, well, that's, I don't like that. So how would you and Roy also assuring fiscal responsibility? Because we do look at the taxes, we look at the assessments, and we have to look at those every year with the budget. So with the fiscal responsibility, have you looked at the budget? I know Roy's looked at it, but have you looked at the budget to see how can we make the city more accountable for their ask to the citizens?
Sure. I haven't read the entire full budget, but I've seen the highlights of it first off. And when you were talking about that communication being an afterthought, I'm talking about constant communication. So even when ideas are presented, that we find ways to get that information out there to the community. I think being physically responsible not only for the city but even everybody's own lives is a huge thing. We can't print money like the government. We have a set number of amount of revenue, and then we look every year at that budget and figure out what's the best way to spend that money given the revenue. And if there's ways that we can communicate savings year to year over certain departments that we end up spending way less than we thought on this particular project, or we ended up spending way more on this particular project, being honest and truthful to our community, they deserve that. And we need to find better ways to even to show those things, to show those wins and show those losses. And again, I think it just goes with communication.
Yeah. Do you have any comments, Councilman Neese?
It's the budget is something where we hold the cities accountable for what they're spending and the projects that they bring forward to us. One of the nice things that we did add is a budget committee, which actually can take a much deeper dive into that. So we have several committees that we have formed. One is the legislative committee, which I chaired, and then the budget committee, which Councilwoman Owen has chaired. And so the nice thing about these additional committees, it gives some additional time to really dig into some of the details and hold the staff accountable. And I think it's important that we continue to ask questions make sure the projects that they're putting forward, really are going to meet the needs of the community. I just want to speak a little bit to the openness and the fact that no one notifying the community. I mean, there are a lot of things that we've done to try to bring what the council is doing, out to the community. And there's doesn't mean that there's not new ideas that we can't generate. And so I any of these ideas that someone wants to bring forward to get the word out to what's happening, when the agenda, what's on the agenda, things like that. I'm years ago, I was signed up for all the land use issues. You can sign up online and get those notices. And so you know exactly what's going on in every single land use issue. So you're aware of that those type of things within the city. So the city has given the availability for the public to actually be informed. But there is a time when you have to actually hold the public accountable to say, okay, I'm going to take the step to be informed, so I can sign up for those emails or go online and look at the different agendas, because open meeting laws, we are required to post things well in advance. In fact, we exceed those open meeting laws. We pass those. We typically put our agenda out for the public to see, a week or 2 weeks before actually we're going to vote on it. A week before we vote on it. So with that information is there. We also have agendas that are draft agendas that are planned out through the whole year. So you see topics that are coming before the city council. So we do a lot that does allow the public to be informed, but the public there's a point in time where we have to ask the public to really kind of take that step to, be informed on their own. So thank you.
All right. So by way of opening the floor up for closing comments, Councilman Neese, can you point to some of your accomplishments from the last 4 years, and respectively, why should voters re-elect you?
Well, I was talking a little bit about this. There are so many different accomplishments, as was mentioned, Castle Rock Park. We also worked on High Sierra Dog Park. For years, there was no bathroom up there, and working with Councilmember Ewald, we were able to get some bathrooms up there, shelters and things like that. And you'll notice that, often it's not just me. I mean, this is a team effort where there's 11 people on the council. I'm 1 out of 11. I'm not a majority. You have to have 6 to have a majority. You have to have a coalition of people to work together. And I think I've done a really good job of building coalition, even though we're not partisan. We have liberal and conservative, and I'm a conservative vote, and I work with all of the council members to come up with different solutions to help the city move forward. Inner Belt Loop is a great one. I mean, that started in '97 with Larry Brewster saying to buy that damn land. And so we bought it now here this last year. We're building it. It should be done next year. On the Heights Task Force, I was as the chair. That was one of the times where we actually got the initial phase 1 done, which is Wicks down into Alkali Creek, and that just kind of started the project to kind of move forward. Things like that. I'm working to build in the Heights, different ways. We got, again, as mentioned, the bypass on the east side of the Heights, or the northeast side. That's going to be a huge development area that we have to look forward to. I advocated and pushed for different development studies on that, and they're doing that. And so those are the kind of things that we need to continue on to look for, how the Heights is going to grow, how we can, not just for residential, but for commercial growth in there. I could go, there's a whole list of stuff I've come to mind at different times, but I think as far as why to reelect me is I'm a conservative voice for the Heights. I really am concerned about the property rights. I'm concerned about making sure that people can go out and work, live, and play in the Heights, enjoy the city, and really let us know and respond to them and their needs and build that. And I think it's important that we focus on that public safety, make sure people can be safe where they play, but where they work. And so I'll bring that and do what we can and work together with the rest of the council to build the city.
Mr. Hansen, can you point to any times where you would have voted differently over the last 4 years? And respectfully, why should voters elect you?
I definitely don't have a specific issue or ordinance or anything that was passed by city council in the last 4 years, primarily because I'm busy like everybody else. I have two businesses. I'm a single father. And that's a huge area that I've kind of tried to explain today, and I'd love to talk to people more about it. But I think communication of city services needs to be better. Yes, the information's out there. I can go and read all the laws that the state of Montana passes and stuff that too. But younger people don't have that time. Older people don't even have that time. But if we can make that information easily digestible in the modern age, people will then get more excited about wanting to be a part of city government, local government, state government. And so if I had those communication tools, 5 years ago, I'd be a lot more knowledgeable than I am today. I would really like to see the Heights get a TIF district. I would like to work with the businesses up there and spur that commercial and residential development even further than what it's doing now, especially on the commercial side, and see to the future of, with the Inner Belt Loop and the Johnson Lane Bridge in that direction as well. So,
All right, let's give both these candidates a big round of applause. I want to thank our business advocacy sponsors again. Thank you again to the Billings Association of Realtors for hosting us. And thank you, all of you, for being here today. Have a great rest of your day.